Well,
Hello,
hello.
everybody. Welcome to the In the Know Idaho podcast. I'm Lily, and I'm here with Annie today.
Hello, everyone.
And we are very new at this, so please bear with me.
I know, we're like, do you say something? Do I say something?
Yeah, what should we do?
Give an intro or something?
I know, I wonder, we should probably introduce ourselves. Lizzie and I didn't do that last time.
Okay, like what kind of introduction stuff?
I don't know. I don't really
Our
know what
political
people want to know.
affiliation.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, my name is Annie Sweat. I am 26 years old, and I grew up conservative. I'm conservative now, and I'm just here in the Know Idaho, having fun talking about politics, learning about politics, and being able to share that with some friends, because that's been really fun.
Yeah. And I'm Lily. I'm 24. And I was homeschooled through my whole education. And then I skipped college. I'm a business owner. And I do this for fun on the weekends. So, yeah, that's a little, I guess that's a good starting point for people. So I invited Annie to do this, and I figured we could each just kind of bring a topic that we've been thinking about, because we have like a group chat going, and sometimes we'll say something like we've had this idea, and then we both just start talking, and yeah, it's fun to just like have some thorough conversations, and it's fun to record it so that it's not just us benefiting from what we're learning. And yeah, so Annie, do you want to introduce or no, should I introduce my topic first?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll introduce
Let's
mine.
do yours first.
So my topic that's kind of been on my mind lately is common sense. So common sense, it seems a little bit complicated, and it seems a little bit misunderstood, because you have both sides, meaning Republicans and Democrats, talking about common sense in different contexts. Like, I see the phrase thrown around on the Facebook comment section of the president's Facebook page, whoever the president is. So, like, when Trump was president, people are saying all these things like, oh, you're the best president, such common sense policies, whatever. But then people say the exact same thing when his polar opposite gets into office, and it's Joe Biden. There's people saying the exact same thing, and I'm personally trying to figure out what it actually means, because I think it's something that people think that they know what it is, but it can't have two opposite meanings. So I've been working on...
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure, Lily? It is 2023. Can't it?
Okay, well... Well, that's the thing, though. It kind of does. Like, if you look at the modern definition, it's leaning a very different way than the old Revolutionary Era definition. So, there's that.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. That's just dovetailing with a lot of thoughts that I've been having recently, just about language and how divided we are because of our language.
Yes.
And there's some of that stuff that's pretty obvious. Trying to think of an example that's like, I think that when liberals say, or Democrats say something like socialism, what they think of is welfare. And what conservatives hear when you say socialism is collectivism or communism or Marxism. And so there's just that these words don't mean the same thing to the same people. And there's like big concepts like that is true of, but there's also just like most words.
Right.
it seems to be that we have two different definitions for, and that's where a lot of just yelling at each other across the bow, happens, because we're using the same words, talking about different things.
Yes.
So I've just been realizing lately how much we need to understand what these words actually mean, or at least understand our own definitions and not just, I don't know, using them because we think we understand what they mean or because other people around us use them.
Right. I know, yeah. I feel the exact same way. I think we need to get very clear on what we're saying, what we actually mean, and if we're using the right words or not. Because if we're not, we just need to start using different words. There's a word for what we're trying to say.
But anyway, I'm curious. What is the Revolution era definition of common sense, and then what is the modern definition?
Okay. So the way that I was discovering the differences is I was comparing definitions from an 1828 dictionary to dictionary.com. So, like, the most easily Googled dictionary today. And common sense, like, as a phrase, doesn't necessarily have a definition of its own in the dictionary. So you just have to look at common and look at sense and then put them together. But so I wasn't really prepared to screen share, so I'll just
read it.
Yeah, I'll just read it. I'll just try and pick out all the non-jumbly parts that I have written down here. So in 1828, this is the 1828 Webster's Dictionary. It says, common means belonging equally to more than one or to many indefinitely, as life and sense are common to man and beast. So that's like the first definition. Second definition is belonging to the public, having no separate owner. The fourth definition is universal, belonging to all, like the earth. Or not the earth, but like the earth is said to be the common mother of all mankind. That's what they've written down in their dictionary. So public, general, frequent. So that has to do with like the occurrence level.
So it's like the antonym of peculiar. I was looking at the definition of peculiar in the 1828, and it's belonging specifically to one person. Your peculiar air, your peculiar manner, your peculiar way of frame of mind, or something like that. It's very specific, belonging only to you.
Yeah. I've been looking at that word recently too, because I feel like every time I've heard it, it was used to mean strange.
Yeah. Unique.
Yes. Peculiar. Yeah, so they mention a couple things that got me thinking about this definition was, well, first of all, the idea that something that is common is something that is available to all. So sense is something that anyone is capable of. It's something that anyone can like find within themselves. Like we all have the same ability to reason to different degrees, but you know, like we all have that. we all have the skill.
We have the potential to reason.
Yes.
You do have to.
Oh no. Hold on. Okay, maybe my light has a timer.
We have the potential to reason. Not everyone develops the capability, but
yeah, it's okay. What's going
on? It doesn't like you, Lily.
Yeah, apparently not. Hold on, just a second.
You're bright enough on your own.
I'll just use my shiny personality. The other one is belonging to the public. So the word public had me questioning it a little bit because let's see. So public. Maybe I should, let's see. I had this thought written down, which might help me communicate it, but it's like public. I don't know if this was the part where I started thinking about this, but the word public doesn't really seem to have boundaries. I don't know why I was thinking about that right now.
Just what is and what is not public.
Right. Yes. So when you're thinking about common sense, that's something that's obviously a ability that's built into every living human. But if you're thinking about other things that might be common, like common
space.
Yeah, common spaces, common rooms. Yeah. It's not common to all mankind. Yeah. So I just thought that was interesting that common can mean that it belongs to everybody, or it can mean that it belongs to a group.
I see.
Yeah. But then it also, the fourth definition says universal, so belonging to all. So yeah, I guess just depending on the thing that you're talking about, there are different levels of ownership. And so let's see. I'm just kind of reading through my notes to see if I said anything really good.
I was having good thoughts, guys, I promise.
Yeah. Oh, well, so I don't really want to get into like all these little thoughts that I was having, but I'll just mention this one. I thought it was interesting reading the word ordinary in this context made me think about it differently. Because ordinary, to me, that does mean common, but it might mean like it's not special.
Mm-hmm.
But then
commonplace.
Yeah, commonplace. But ordinary, it has the same structure as words like ordinance or ordain, which made me think about it differently.
Yeah, there's a connotation of authority or
or design.
A certain place or design. Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. So I'll go down here to the dictionary.com definition of common. It's similar, but it is, I don't even know how, but it leans socialist.
Okay, walk me through this.
Okay, so dictionary.com defines common as belonging equally to or shared alike by two or more or all in question. So it's almost like they are defining, it's the definition of ownership is changeable.
Did the first definition include the word ownership?
Ownership.
Because
it says belonging.
That's not the same as ownership. Like, you belong to your family, you don't own it. Like, I think that is the sticking point for me, because to say the I don't know, like a public forum, like a public space, it belongs to everyone is different than saying everyone owns it.
Yeah.
right? And so, but to say everyone owns it, it's owned by everyone, is probably what makes it sound more socialist, right?
Yeah.
that there is no idea of ownership in socialism. There's no idea of public or private property.
Right.
Everything is owned by everyone.
Yeah.
As opposed to belong. You'd have to look at like the semantic differences between belong and own, but
yeah, I guess. So with belonging, though, if something does belong to everyone, why wouldn't they own it? Like if it's a, what was the example you just used?
Like a public square or a public forum. This is a space where we meet.
Like it belongs to the citizens of that.
Right. But they don't. Ownership also implies responsibility. If you think about like a public park, I'm not responsible for the park.
But should we be?
I mean, if it's a city park or a state park, it is funded by taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
But the maintenance and the decision making.
Yeah.
We don't make decisions about how the parks are going to be built or how they're going to be run or anything. There is a council that we elect or whatever sort of situation. A council that elects a the word escapes me right now. A manager.
Okay. Yeah.
The head.
Oh.
I can't think of the name for this.
Like a. Oh, geez.
Thanks, brain. I love that it just deletes things on me. But so, yeah, we pay for the parks collectively. We do not own. We don't run the parks. We don't have the responsibility of that.
Right.
But we're responsible for electing the people who hire the people who do. Anyway, it's.
Yeah, that kind of clicked for me. The part about
it's like. Well, I'm trying to think of another like common example. A public. Something that's not so physical. You know what I mean? Something like public.
Like a job that doesn't necessarily have to do with property.
Yeah, or like just not something not physical, something like voting. The voting is open to the public. It belongs to the public, but we don't own the vote. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, that does make sense to me. Like ownership, it does include a responsibility. So yeah, it's not the same as belonging. But yeah, I think just the fact that, so in the 1828, the first thing it says is that it gives the example that life and sense are common to man. And it opens it up to an indefinite number of owners, for lack of a better term. But yeah, then the newer definition, it's talking about sharing, which maybe that's a word I need to look up too, but it seems like what they're trying to say is that it's something that can be shared, not something that is inherently shared, you know? Their second definition says pertaining or belonging equally to an entire community, nation, or culture, which is also interesting.
Common. So you would like common traditions, common.
Yeah.
Beliefs, common.
Common facial features or, things like that. It also calls it joint, united, widespread, general, universal, of frequent occurrence, usual, familiar.
Interesting. Joint and united were not part of the previous definition.
No.
But I guess you could say that's something like a common purpose.
Right. The example that they give is a common defense. So they're using a constitutional phrase as an example.
Defense.
Yeah.
What does that mean in the Constitution for our common defense?
Well, the Constitution was established to provide for the common defense.
So just the defense of the public, of the nation.
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting. Because I don't know, joint and united don't make sense to me as part of that definition.
I know, yeah. I think they just threw that in there.
Just for fun.
Well, because that is the modern that's what they want the modern understanding to be.
Common. I see. Okay, yeah. Because it's the reason that I think it's not part of that definition is because in order to be united, in order to be joint, you have to actually, I would say, make choices. That might not be the best way to put that, though. But you have to. This is confusing because I see why it goes with socialism, because the Marxist goal, the Marxist the end goal is for everyone to be united in, because that is the only way that socialism works.
Mm-hmm.
But united in what? You have to be united around something. You can't just be united. And so common belongs to everyone. And according to the older definition, it's, did it say inherent? Was that part of it? Or just belonging to? Actually, this gets into diversity, because if it's belonging to, people don't belong to every cause. Every cause doesn't belong to everyone, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how actual diversity works, is that different people care about different things, have different priorities, have, different causes, purposes, and that's how you actually get diversity. And so that's with the whole in their quest for fake diversity, they're eliminating real diversity, because if everyone is to be united, there cannot be any diversity, because it must be common. It must be unity must belong to everyone, but unity around what? We have to all believe the same things, think the same things. Yeah.
That's a good point. The old definition does not have inherent. That was my thought.
Okay.
That was something that I had said. Yeah. But it says belonging. So, yeah.
We don't belong to causes. We choose them.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a
and you point. Have to be unified and joint. There has to be something that you're unified and joint around.
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't belong in that definition at all.
Yeah.
And so a common cause, I can see why they think a joint effort maybe is where they're making that connection. Oh, you can just substitute common for joint. No, they actually mean different things.
Yeah. Very true. Now, let's look at the definition of sense, because this is where it gets very interesting. So in the old dictionary, sense is the faculty of the soul by which it perceives external objects by means of impressions made on certain organs of the body. That's the first one.
Whoa.
So it's like you feel something and your soul interprets it for you.
Interesting.
Yeah. Or you could feel it, you could see it, like you could see someone stealing someone's purse and know that you need to go help them. Like it's not just a matter of observing.
I see something. I hear something.
Yes. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sensation, perception by the senses, perception by the intellect, apprehension, discernment. I love that they put discernment there because we have mentioned that word before and how it's like the thing that we need so bad to navigate.
Don't you think? Yeah, don't you think that puts the word sensual in an interesting context?
The soul, yeah.
But what was it? Oh, I just heard the Star Wars in my head. I'm sensing something. You know.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they pretty much got it there. So apprehension, I had to look up that word because I've never heard it used like that before. I always thought that apprehension meant that you were afraid of something, like you were apprehensive of it. You're like,
Or
no,
trepidatious.
thank you. Yeah. But apprehend means, one definition is like to grab hold of something, like you apprehend that guy.
Apprehend.
Yeah. Like they apprehended the suspect. But then the second use is to consider it without taking hold of it. So it's like kind of the opposite.
To consider it without taking hold of it. I'm trying to figure out how it came to mean what it means today.
The mere contemplation of things without affirming, denying, or passing any judgment. The mere contemplation.
Now I need to go look up what mere means.
Mere, yeah. And then, so comprehension is a similar word, but comprehension is where you like take it in a little bit more, I think. So apprehend is like the first step in the thinking process.
So mere means distinct from anything else or absolute entire. The entire thing. So I don't know which definition this means.
Wait, what was the first one?
Distinct from anything else. This or that only. I know. Today, mere means something like simple. Just. Like, it's simple. It's just this. It's just that. It's merely this. It's merely that. It's a small thing. But this doesn't mean that.
Well, when you say the real definition, I can see how we misunderstood how people were using it, though, because they might have been saying it's merely a fault of the government. So what they were trying to say is like it
is entirely
it very specifically is. But maybe it wasn't true. Maybe it wasn't true, and so then we misunderstood.
Interesting. It's funny how so many words actually mean the opposite of what they used to mean because of irony. Yeah. They started being used ironically, and now they mean the ironic version. Okay, so read that to me again now that I know what mere means. This is the definition of apprehension.
Yes. The mere contemplation of things without affirming, denying, or passing any judgment.
So the complete or distinct. You're not thinking about anything else. You're not contemplating anything else or I don't know if that means no context, no nothing.
Or you're not doing anything else with the thought besides contemplating it. Because you haven't affirmed it, you haven't denied it, and you haven't passed any judgment yet.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. How the heck did that come to mean trepidatious?
I don't know. Oh, man.
Okay, so how is that connected to sense again?
To sense, because sensing is apprehending. Oh wait, I lost your video. Where'd you go?
Oh no. I can still see you.
Oh. Well, why can't I see you? Oh. It says you'll be back soon. The website says everything's fine.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Sense is perception by the intellect, apprehension, discernment.
So wouldn't apprehension and discernment be kind of opposites?
Apprehension and discernment?
Yeah. Because isn't discernment, making judgment or understanding nuance or judgment, or I don't have a good. What does discernment mean? Let's look that one up.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, could they be using the first definition of apprehension? Like, because when you're perceiving something, you are receiving new information, and so maybe you're apprehending new information.
The act of discernment is distinguishing one thing from another. So you actually have to discern to apprehend. You have to be able to, in order to be contemplating one whole thing completely or in isolation, you have to be able to discern it from other things. I think.
Yeah. That sounds reasonable. I was gonna say the fourth definition is quickness or acuteness of perception. There's also understanding, soundness of faculties, strength of natural reason, reasonable or rational meaning, conviction, moral perception, all sorts of things. So it's a very full word.
Interesting. I'm looking at it now too. I was having trouble following along.
Oh yeah.
Just listening, but it says opinion, notion, judgment. Isn't that the opposite
of apprehension?
Of apprehension. Okay, but sense.
I mean, when you're sensing something, you could go through all of those steps. Because first you have to apprehend it. And then you might go on to forming an opinion.
I see.
And you're still using your senses. Or your sense.
Your sense.
Very different from senses. Yeah. So the definition on dictionary.com, I want to write them a letter. Because this is lacking in so much. Here's what they say. Sense. Any of the faculties, such as sight, hearing, smell, taste, or touch, by which humans and animals perceive stimuli originating from outside or inside the body. Stimuli.
Stimuli. Okay. This is... I haven't learned this enough to be able to express it quite exactly with all the details involved. So I've been studying the education system. And there was this... it's coming out of the rationalism and materialism of the early 20th century. I mean, it started earlier than that, but that's when it kind of really hit like academia in America. Was this idea that humans are just creatures that react to stimuli.
Right.
And you study the history of education and the transformation of education, and that's actually what was driving a lot of the way that they designed this the current school system, is the idea that learning is simply reacting to stimuli. And so that's all that you have to do with kids, is expose them to the correct expose them to the correct stimulation that will what's that word? Provoke the correct response. And so the books that I'm reading is calling this, it's just behavior modification. And, you know, it's not actual learning. It's just we have to input the correct stimuli to output the right response. And it's a completely different idea of science, of learning, of humans than was common to thought before.
I felt like this definition just like stripped the humanity right out of it. Because the last one was talking about soul, conviction, like things that you feel in your heart. And this one is just like, it's stimuli, it's organs, it's a sensation.
Interesting.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. Again, going back to the word sensual, and the modern definition. Now I'm curious what the 1828 says.
Yeah.
It's completely pertaining to the senses, as distinct from the mind or soul. Consisting in sense, affecting the senses.
Yeah.
Dang. Okay. If type definition number 4 in theology, cardinal, pertaining to the flesh or body. So, you know, it's in there, but like not what it's not like society today.
Yeah. Nope. I like this one from dictionary.com as well. A more or less vague perception or impression.
I'm sensing something.
It's just swirling.
I think. Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it's just so bland.
Is there, so what, how did they cover, like, what were those examples in a legal sense, or in a grammatical sense, or in a figurative sense? Does the dictionary.com have something that makes any sense?
Let me look at that again.
Lily, you ruined me forever.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking about that use. The recognition of something as incumbent or fitting? Would that be it? A legal sense.
Okay, yeah, I guess kind of.
The
1828 says for that particular definition of sense, it's meaning, importance, signification, I probably didn't pronounce it right. The true sense, as in the true sense of words or phrases. In interpretation, we are to examine whether words are to be understood in a literal or figurative sense.
Yeah. The meaning of a word or phrase in a specific context, especially as isolated in a dictionary or glossary. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so that was kind of making me upset because you can't use the phrase common sense in an ethical argument if the definition has nothing to do with ethics. You know?
So you think that 1828 has something to do with ethics?
Yes. Because it talks about conviction and moral perception. So the newer one, it doesn't have anything to do with that. The newer one focuses on intelligence, on intellect. So it's just like whatever you fed your head. That's
and
where
how your head interprets it.
Yes. Yeah, it's like that's where the sense is coming from. But yeah, I think if someone was making an argument that they were on the side of common sense, like, let's talk about common sense gun control. That's the one that I hear the most, where they're like, this is just common sense. If this is the dictionary that they're reading, or if this is society's understanding of the word in
Mm-hmm.
general,
Yeah.
then it's an intelligence based argument. I don't know how to say that, but
So, in other words, what they mean is this is just like if you're smart.
right.
If you thought about this at all, if you're smart.
Yeah. Yeah,
Actually, what that would mean is if you interpret this the way everybody else interprets it.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that the common part?
Right. Yeah. I can see how that could be.
If you smart the senses. In this online 1828 I'm reading, it has common sense at the bottom of it. Did you see that?
Mm-mm.
Says common sense, that power of the mind which, by a kind of instinct or a short process of reasoning, perceives truth, the relation of things, cause and effect, etc., and hence enables the possessor to discern what is right, useful, expedient, or proper, and adopt the best means to accomplish his purpose. This power seems to be the gift of nature, improved by experience and observation.
That's good. Yeah.
Is that different than the modern sense of the word?
I would say yes.
Lily, what have you done to me? I can't.
Sense. Yeah, it seems like how do I say this? Common sense. Yeah, you're right. So today when people use the phrase common sense, a lot of times what they're, let's see. So I'm just going to talk about common sense gun control because that's
Okay.
usually where I hear it. So if they're saying that this is a common sense idea, but it's, I don't know how to say this.
Okay, I think I could clearly define the difference.
Okay.
I think. So the old definition is saying the power of mind that is an instinct or the ability to reason or the ability to perceive truth, all of these definitions of sense that we went through. This power is common to mankind. Everyone has the ability to do it. Whereas the modern definition is saying this is what everybody thinks. This is the common sense. And they're using sense more in the idea of consensus or I don't even want to say sensibility because that means something different today too. But the common sensibility, you could say that the common instincts, the common feeling, the common
thought
about this thing, as opposed to having common access to sense.
Right.
Which will not produce the same thoughts and the same reasoning.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like, I can tell you what common sense today is not. It's not. It doesn't. If it's only one party who thinks that they have common sense, like, don't you think we would all notice? if if it was real, because we supposedly all have it, like, yeah, like if you're gonna try to pass a law by calling it a common sense measure, but at the same time, it's causing things, um, it's causing harm to different groups. Like, you're no longer on common you're no longer on common ground. Like, if you're doing something like a gun control law, if you're trying to impose the inability to defend oneself on your fellow man, that's breaking the cardinal rules of common sense. Because common sense, like instinct, is that everyone wants to be able to defend themselves, because we know, like using our common sense, that evil exists. We've seen it, we've encountered it. So, yeah, it's just backwards.
I'm trying to think of an example to make this more concrete too, on the differences between the two, and that brings up, in thinking of an example, it brings up a question about what you said. So the example I would think is with guns. Okay, it's common sense not to wave your gun around with your finger on the trigger. It's common sense not to do that.
Right.
But with the two definitions of common sense, they come from different places. So the old definition of common sense, you reach that conclusion because you reasoned it out. You had an instinct that puts people in danger. Like,
yes,
don't do it. It is springing from your sense, the individual. Whereas the modern version is, it's common sense because, well, maybe these aren't as different as I thought. I'm trying to apply. It's common sense because because you're taught that it's common sense. It's like common sense is a taught thing.
I think, okay, this is interesting. I think that they're using the phrase common sense to point out that something is wrong, but they're pointing to the wrong thing.
Okay, walk me through that.
Okay, so common sense gun control aims to keep people from senselessly dying. Mostly kids at school. Okay, so the issue is we don't want kids dying at school.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the real solution is to not have schools. To not gather all these kids into a vulnerable public place every day where people might want to come blow off some steam for no reason, you know?
So that's your common sense.
That's my common sense.
I'm playing with it now. I don't even entirely know what I'm saying. So, because that kind of follows the same logic as they do, right? So I'm not as familiar with the phrase common sense. Is that pro gun control or anti gun control?
So I always hear it in pro gun control because that's literally, people push for common sense gun laws, which includes more restrictions, tracking, background checks.
Okay. So basically, with the school shooter issue, they say, well, guys, it's common sense. If the kids are shooting people with guns, they need to not have guns.
Right.
And so that's why I'm saying you have the same logic. Well, if kids are getting shot in school, maybe they should just not go to school.
Right.
And so
the problem is that each of those has a downside. Like, if you take away the guns of a population, you're vulnerable to attack from other countries. Or you're vulnerable to the encroachment of a tyrannical government. And on the flip side, if you... Let's see. So that was the... What was the downside to the other one? I had it.
With public school, I mean, kids are at home. And I know you and I don't see that as a downside, but it's a difficulty.
I don't know if that was the downside I was thinking of, but...
Okay, if kids are not in school.
Kids are not in school. Yeah, maybe it is. I don't remember. It's gone.
Okay, so you were saying that they use common sense to point out that something is wrong, but it's something different, or it's...
Yeah, it's like they're pointing out that something is wrong. Let's say it's this. Let's rally everyone around the fact that it's this, but it might actually be something else. It's like a misdirection thing.
But don't you think it could be just legitimate? Because if you're looking at the original definition, it like common sense would get you different outcomes. It would get you different thoughts on things. It wouldn't be a consensus. You know?
You mean like...
And so, is it a misdirection, or is it they just came to a different conclusion?
I think it depends on who it is.
Yeah.
It's... Yeah. When you
but
know...
it is...
Go ahead.
Sorry. I guess calling it common sense means they're trying to override... They don't mean it in the original definition, because they obviously mean it as, well, duh, you should agree with this. It's common sense. It's just common sense, guys. Whereas that is completely cutting off and going around pro-gun arguments that are common sense based, such as, I'm a woman. If I get cornered in a dark alley, I want a gun. Like, that's... I want to be able to defend myself. And so by saying it's common sense, it means everyone should agree with it, right? Is that what you mean by using it in a misdirection kind of way?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I guess I'm looking at it really big picture here, where I know that the goal is to disarm the population.
Right.
Because I know that there are people who want more power.
Right.
Like, I know that is a fact. And so to say that it's common sense, I'm over here going, well, I think I might have a little bit more common sense. Just a new level of common sense. Well, yeah, it's like it conflicts with my common sense. And I agree that everyone might come to different forms of the same conclusion. That's kind of what's happening in the country, where like everyone's got a different idea about how the gun control can be accomplished or how the mass shootings can be lessened. Everyone's got a different idea about that, and they're drawing from their own experiences and their own wealth of common sense. So, yeah. I just know that there's more going on behind the scenes, and so in a situation like that, we can't just say that this is going to work because it's taking the weapon out of the situation. Like, there's not enough common sense applied to that logic, because weaponless people are vulnerable
It's
people.
so narrow, you mean?
Yeah.
It's such a narrow view of a limited view of the gun issue in total.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's how I'm thinking about it. Yeah, let me scroll through my notes to see if I had anything else, but I want to move on to your topic.
This will be interesting. This will be interesting indeed.
Yes.
We'll see if we can tie it to common sense. So let me know if you have more to say about common sense, though. Yeah, how did it come to mean the obvious?
Because I think that everyone, people who have common sense, it's obvious to them. So,
well, I can see it also could just came to, it's the sense word that really changed the most, right?
yeah.
That in common sense, what the sense means is you're sensible,
Right.
you're smart, you're capable of reasoning. So, but somehow it got backwards to, if you're a reasoning person, you would obviously come to the common conclusion.
Right. Yeah, and I think how I was saying that there's more going on behind the scenes, and I feel like it's a misdirection thing. I really do think that it's a way to take advantage of people who are less educated in just all those little the minutia of life in a way. Like, I think it takes advantage. That's why conservatives get so upset about this, is because of course we don't
I have
want
some more
people...
thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, of course we don't want kids getting shot at school, and we don't want anyone getting shot at the hands of a mass shooter. No one wants that. But we know that so many more people will die if the guns are taken away. So many more. Like you and me, your neighbors, your friends. It's not even a question because it's already happened. So anyone who knows that it's already happened knows how serious this is, and they're not willing to even consider the idea of giving up their guns because they know that's just not an option.
Check your privilege. No, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
It is a very privileged viewpoint that disarming the American population would have no effect.
Right.
Because that is a huge piece of how we became who we are and still remain that way. And so it is extreme privilege that you don't have to think about that you don't have to consider your own protection.
Yeah.
Or feel endangered for most of your existence.
Yeah.
So check your privilege, guys. Okay. Yeah, I can't help myself.
It's true. All right. I am done. That was
cool beans. That was fun. All right,
Annie,
so
what do you have for us today?
I wanted to talk about what I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is conservatism and liberalism, and what those words actually mean, and the differences, the similarities historically. So I've been reading some into this. It's my secondary research, tertiary research.
All I do is learn.
All I do is learn. It's my tertiary research project at this point. But
does that mean third?
Yes.
For the viewers at home. Okay.
Yes. Secondary, tertiary, I don't know what fourth would be.
Not gonna go there.
But it's so conservatism, liberalism, and why this question came up for me specifically was as we've started talking more, I just be like, okay, so like what is conservatism? Because there seems to be mass confusion on this point among liberals and conservatives. Like, there's things that I'll hear that I'm like, from like Republicans or conservatives or whatever, I'm like, that doesn't sound particularly conservative, or at least my upbringing as a conservative. Or you hear leftists saying things about conservatives, and I'm like, that was nowhere a part of my upbringing at all. And so, like, if you were to take the left, a generous liberal opinion of a conservative and so I'm not talking about the crazy leftists, but a generous liberal perspective of a conservative seems to consist of entitlement, rich, religious, strict. I don't know if you could think of any other words, Lily. Ideological and opinionated.
Well, privileged is the usual one.
Yeah.
Privileged, educated.
Well,
nepotism.
I don't know, because they certainly nepotism. They certainly call us uneducated a lot.
Yeah.
It's like there's a mere belief about conservatives. They're either like rich white nepotism babies, capitalists, or they're like redneck, podunk, uneducated, like poor. I don't know. Like,
that's so funny. Yeah, it's
which one is
all
it?
Across the board.
So just basically not rich white academics or inner city black people. Or Hispanic. You know, racial minority, inner city people. And so I was like, what? Like, I don't know about you, Lily, but very little of that applies to my life. I suppose rich depends on your definition. I feel like I had a solidly middle class. Like the middle of the middle class. And I suppose that's very privileged to some people, as rich to some people. But from the middle class perspective, it's like, you know, we did all right. We weren't. We didn't go hungry. We had some luxuries, but very few. You know.
Yeah, I think about that a bit, just because, like, just with the idea of how it's my parents and my grandparents who have made my life a little bit more comfortable. And so there is like a privilege there. They wanted to give me that privilege. They wanted my life to be easier. So there is that part of it for sure.
Right. Yep. I would not have called. See, this is the hard thing. I would not have called my upbringing strict, but I think that other people would. You know what I mean? Like, you weren't allowed to do this. You weren't allowed to have sleepovers. You weren't allowed to, I don't know, whatever. There's probably a lot of things, but it was like the framing was not, I wasn't allowed to. You know what I mean? The framing was, that's not a good idea because, and it was a conversation, and I actually wanted my parents' guidance, and, you know, all those things. Trying to think of the other. Anyway. Just to, all of this is to the point that I think conservatives and liberals both have very different ideas about ourselves and each other. And in trying to read more and expose myself to more, realizing that maybe we're not as different as maybe we think. And so that got me looking into conservative philosophy and liberal philosophy, trying to understand why are we so divided, and what is this? And principally it's because of the radicalism of the left over the last decade and a half. Because I watch conservative media, not super conservative, but and as the left has become more extreme, more liberals leave and they find a home in more conservative media. And so you start hearing conversations between old school liberals and conservatives, and so and they agree on most things, and so it has to kind of go like, what's
happened?
The big deal, guys? Like, I'm so confused on like why this is such a mess. Why is this such a mess? And so and it just realizing that I didn't actually know conservative philosophy. I know the conservative talking points. You know what I mean? We're pro-gun. We're pro-life. We're, anti-establishment, which it was a really weird one because that used to be the liberal point of view, not the conservative point of view. But, personal responsibility, private property, blah, 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 constitutional. Like, we know all the conservative talking points, but do we know the whys? Do we know the hows of how conservatism came to be? And I think part of the confusion of the language is because conservatism isn't a set of beliefs. American conservatism involves a set of liberal beliefs. And so this is why we're a very liberal country, even though half of us are conservative.
Okay.
So I thought maybe we could go through the conservative principles. So to put that in like his historical perspective, a historical conservative outside of the perspective of America. So before America was a thing, conservative just meant disliking change, maintaining the current order. And this is why it's not actually a set of values, because it just means to maintain the current order or
you're conserving other values.
Right, you're conserving some kind of value. Conservative doesn't actually involve values. And so a king could be conservative because he wanted to keep things the same way. He wasn't interested in modification or adaptation to events. He wanted it to stay the same. And so liberalism wasn't really an idea until probably the middle of the 1500s. I might be wrong about that, but you can kind of trace it to several different things that happened, but one of the bigger ones was Martin Luther, the rise of Protestantism, and the breaking of the hold of the Catholic Church over the European monarchies, because the church was the highest authority, even above the kings. And so once they broke the authority of the church, it started 200 years of conflict over, okay, so who's in charge? Like, okay, so who determines what's the truth? Who determines what's right and what's wrong? Who determines what wars are good, what wars are bad? Who determines what we're even fighting over? And especially because in most of the nations in Europe, I know I'm more familiar with English history, so I can't really speak to any of the other nations. But in England, but I believe most of the nations, they believed that their royal authority came from the church, came from God. They were divinely appointed. Yes, divinely appointed. And so if you break the authority of the church, you break the authority of the monarchy. And so out of that rose, different ideas about how you should run a nation. And that gave rise to liberalism, which was the ideas, and these will be very familiar to Americans because it's what America was built on. It's political doctrine that takes protecting and enhancing the freedom of the individual to be the central problem of politics. So this idea of individual liberty, inalienable rights, inherent value, all those things are liberal values. So
they're liberal values because the liberals defined them when they were set in place?
Because that was what that kind of thought was called, as opposed to, so it's opposed to things like caste systems or, just the idea of monarchy and aristocracy, just the idea that all people have the same value.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
So the job of government baked into it is that the job of government is to protect individuals from being harmed by others. And a monarchical structure is not that way at all. It's that the king has the ability to say whatever, harm people because they are his subjects. So he could, if he chooses that it is the greater good that they be harmed, blah 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 blah, blah. And it just kind of trickles down throughout all of it. Sorry, my phone distracting me. So how to get into this? So so our founding fathers were mostly all extremely liberal for their time. Like, America is a liberal country. It was built on liberal beliefs. And by the time America came around, it had 350, 400 years to kind of be developing this thought. You had philosophers working on it. That's where you have John Locke. And there's several other liberal philosophers, but he's probably the one that influenced the founding fathers the most. That sort of thing. It's closer to what we would call libertarianism today, but it's not quite the same.
Is this also what people are talking about when they're trying to describe like classical liberalism?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm confused on that.
Oh.
So I'm still trying to parse out this point. So to get to conservatism, and let's go over what that is. I found there's this thing called the 10 conservative principles, and I found this in several places, so I don't believe it's just this article who's listing them out. And I thought we could kind of go through them and just talk about, are these true? Because the thing is, as a conservative, I conserve liberal values.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some contradictions in there. And so as we go through this like conservative principles thing, I think it would be interesting to talk about, are these true for us? Do we actually believe these? Is this how we understand the world? Okay, so this is the 10 conservative principles. First, the conservative believes that there exists an enduring moral order. That order is made for man and man is made for it. Human nature is a constant and moral truths are permanent. I would say I definitely believe it with that.
Yeah.
That there's so many things baked into that, that it's simpler to just say, yeah, I believe that. And why? See, I don't know.
Getting into it all.
Well, see, the question is, do liberals not believe this?
Today?
Yeah. Or, so to try and separate liberals from, like, leftist Marxists.
Okay, yeah.
And I know they have come, and so a Marxist obviously doesn't believe this. This is like the opposite of Marxism. When you get into it, and maybe Marxism isn't quite the right word. If people want to look into philosophy, look into Hegelism, which is like the precursor to Marxism. But Marxism, it comes along with all of the ideas of moral relativism and progressivism and a lot of different stuff. And so this is obviously not moral relativism. And this implies a creator.
Right.
And so if you're an atheist, it's very hard to believe this.
Yeah. So, let's see. So you were saying we should separate the liberals from the liberals. I'm having a hard time doing that because I can't picture any liberals today who are not socialist leaning or Marxist leaning. So
right.
I think what you said about the libertarians, that seems like if you're looking for the old class of liberals, it seems like they live today in the libertarians. Do you agree with that?
Very, very close.
Okay.
Libertarians is a more specific category from what I've read. I might be wrong about this. So a libertarian believes that the government's only job is to protect citizens from harming each other and from harm coming to the citizens.
Yeah.
A liberal might not think it's just that. They think along the same lines that the personal liberty is one of the paramount goals of government. In the way that I've seen it described, that and it makes sense to me how progressivism came to be a thing. That they are looking to enhance people's personal liberty and to do away with anything that bars personal liberty. And so you can understand how they became concerned and involved with relieving poverty, disease. These are the things that would keep someone from exercising their liberty, states of being that would. And so a liberal implies a little bit more active role, that government does have a concern in relieving anything that would be suppressing the personal liberty of its citizens.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that sounds right. It seems to me like libertarians that I know of, it seems like, yeah, there's not necessarily an obligation to morality.
Mm-hmm.
Because they figure it's kind of like I don't know if they would say this, but it seems like maybe they believe that every man is an island. Like, you can just do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting anybody. That's kind of what I've heard from them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that everyone is it's kind of like every man for himself. So yeah, that would be the
Right.
opposite of taking concern in
I think,
for
yeah,
the poor.
it's connected to, it's like extreme liberalism. This idea that personal liberty above all
Sure,
is the
yeah.
highest value.
Mm-hmm.
Anywho, so what were we? So okay, so that's like, you're right, like original liberal. That was this is the belief that personal liberty is one of the highest concerns of the government, personal liberty of their citizens, and so they should be concerned in anything that is suppressing. This also, and so Thomas Jefferson, and I think you've probably read a lot more Thomas Jefferson than I have. I haven't really studied him yet. I was more interested in George Washington because he's conservative, and he so Thomas Jefferson is like the liberal. And if you go much more liberal than him, you tend to get chaos. And it was the more liberal people in France who were leading the French Revolution, and that turned to blood and chaos. And so America's founding was really this discussion of all these very, very tightly aligned people, but they did vary enough on the conservative to liberal spectrum, or the order to chaos spectrum, that'd be like, okay, we need freedom. Okay, but too much freedom creates chaos. Okay, but if you put those laws in place, it'll create too much restriction on personal, and so it's a dialogue and it's a dynamic that's happening. It's not really a belief in that we can get it right for all time. I don't think either side believe that. It's that it always has to be a dialogue over what is too much, what is not enough.
Right.
And what, I think it kind of comes down to what too much order has its fallout, its consequences. That's the word I was looking for. Too much order has its consequences, and too much chaos has its own consequences. And so I think part of the conversation is just which is the greater sin.
Yeah.
And it's going to be different for different people. It's not really going to be decided. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that when people say I'm a classic, or not even a classic liberal, but Sometimes it means classic liberal. Sometimes it means when they say old school liberal, which is not quite the same. I think
is an old school liberal like
what they
if
just mean
you
is
agree with everything until like the year 2000 or something.
Yeah, pretty much. So it involves a lot of progressivism. So progressivism really came into the liberal party in the early 1900s. Okay. And so by the time you get to the 60s, the Liberal Party is pretty much really progressive. Mm-hmm. And so when you say old school liberal, what you mean is this odd amalgamation of progressivism and liberalism. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's like 3 definitions of liberal. There's like classic liberal, old school liberal, and then like leftist Marxist today. And
oh, go for it.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say the old school liberals really don't like the Marxists. They don't like that the party has been co-opted. They think everyone is insane. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, form your own party. Dang it. Well, but that's how the Marxists survive. They have to commandeer another party. Mm-hmm. I read about that in a book. But I was gonna say, oh geez, where'd it go? What was it? I was gonna say something about the old school liberals. Oh yeah, what is the literal definition of liberal? Have you looked into that? Because I know, like, if you're in a cookbook, it'll say like frost liberally, like put a lot of frosting on it.
Well, which dictionary should I look it up in? I haven't looked it up. Which dictionary should I look in?
The old one, please.
Okay.
But then we should look at the new one for fun.
Yeah, for fun. Okay, I have a free heart, free to give or bestow, not closed or contracted. Munificent, bountiful, generous, giving largely as a liberal donor, the liberal founders of a college or hospital. Wow. It expresses less than profuse or extravagant, however. But generous, ample, large, not selfish, narrow on contracted.
Or
narrow on contracted.
Oh, the paper one says or.
Oh, this is probably just a typo then. Narrow or contracted. So not selfish, narrow or contracted. Catholic? That makes
Catholic?
no sense to me.
What does that mean?
I guess Catholics are generous? Are they? I don't. Enlarged, embracing others' interests than one's own.
How did the Catholics pick their name, though?
The Catholics, I'm pretty sure, are like far more conservative than the evangelicals. This ruins every. What?
General. Time to rewrite the dictionary.
General, extensive, embracing literature and the sciences generally as a liberal education. So this is 1828 dictionary, so it is after the founding of America.
But you have to imagine that he was working on it a little bit before then, or
right, a little bit before. It's not too far after. Right. So it just means advanced, forward-looking, like to have a liberal education with the literature and the sciences, as opposed to a conservative education, a classical education, maybe. I don't know. Okay, so a college education, that's all it means. This phrase is often, but not necessarily synonymous with collegiate. Interesting. Free, open, candid, large, profuse, free, not literal or strict, not mean, which doesn't mean cruel. It means not low in birth or mind. Licentious, free to express. Free to excess is licentious.
Oh. Huh.
Liberal arts, as distinguished from mechanical arts, are such as depend more on the exertion of the mind than on the labor of the hands, and regard amusement, curiosity, or intellectual improvement rather than the necessity of substance or manual labor. Subsistence. I knew I was reading that wrong. Or manual skill. Okay, so that's why it's called a liberal education. It's not a trade.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Okay, anyway. Free, open, generous.
Of a free heart. That's interesting.
Okay, but to go back to conservatism.
Yeah.
So we agree with the first principle. Order is made. Okay, so I was saying, I'm not sure that classical liberals would disagree with this. And it might just be that pretty much everyone was religious at the time of classical liberalism. There was a burgeoning movement of rationalism, and I don't even know what to call it exactly. But atheism and things that birthed Darwin and this. I think rationalism is the right word. I'm not clear on all the terminology of that. But
like a very
most people,
intellectual worldview.
Yeah, and just trying to understand a world without God, trying to prove that the world could exist without God, because that was kind of a unquestioned assumption by everyone. And so pretty much I would say 95% of the population at that time believed in God. And so it's probably classical liberals would agree with this. I think old school liberal probably would not agree with this.
Okay. Yeah.
Definitely a Marxist well. Okay.
Yes.
Second, the conservative adheres to custom, convention, and continuity.
Adheres to custom, convention.
And this is kind of the idea that you don't change anything unless it's not working. If it's working, why do you want to? Don't fix what ain't broke. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the line.
Yeah.
And so conservatism really involves the idea that values and culture are built into our traditions and our customs and our conventions and our way of thinking, and they're kind of this idea of continuity. They're passed down through the culture and through the traditions. And so it's not just like, oh, this is some fun thing that we do. These actually are quite important. So a conservative, it's important to adhere to them, and you don't leave them behind without good reason.
Right. Yes, because they were established for a reason.
Right.
And
throughout all of time, these are the things that have survived.
Right. Yes.
So they're kind of proven. So you don't break them or leave them without good evidence that will continue to improve them. That will actually improve them.
Yeah. It doesn't even have to be all of time. Like today, when we're looking at the founding era, we're trying to conserve what they were doing then.
But they were putting it together from what was true throughout history as well. They were looking historically as well, looking at how the Greeks did things, how the Romans did things, and they were pulling a ton from what worked as democracy was introduced to the British system of government, because there were several revolution sort of things in the centuries leading up to the American Revolution that changed the British government into a 3-branch government. They're not the same branches. They don't operate the same. But, and I think only one of them is elected. I don't know. I'm still looking into the history of all this. But so you see, they were pulling from historically what worked. Historically, what had been proven. They weren't trying to come up with something out of their imagination and their reason.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And then at the same time, they always said that this was a great experiment because there were newer things that they were going to go for it, but it had never been done quite like this. And so it's like
well, the newer things was liberalism. So the Greeks had democracy. They didn't have personal liberty and inalienable that word. those rights.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so not only does wisdom come from our customs, conventions, and stuff, so does what binds us together. We have common history because we share the same culture, the same customs, the same. And so, if you break the idea of customs and culture, everybody just do whatever they want. You know, what is going to bind us together? It has to be something.
Yeah.
This is what's interesting about America, because America is the kind of built on the belief with how many immigrants. Well, it's curious. It's a curious question to me about what the founding fathers thought about immigration, because the conservative founding fathers really did feel that they were British, you know, that they had a British inheritance and traditions that were so similar. And so it's not like they were like, hey, you know, all of the Irish and the Polish and the Italians will want to move here, you know, as started happening.
Yeah, that's funny.
And I read a little bit. So it was one book, so I don't know if this is the only perspective or what's exactly true, but the conservative founding fathers wanted much, much stricter immigration guidelines and rules, laws. Like Jefferson, the more liberal founding fathers were like, no, people can just come live here, and then people can leave when they want, you know. And there's the idea of chaos versus order. The conservatives are like, but we need actual things that bind us together. If we don't have culture in common, and you bring in all of these people with a different culture, what if their culture is extremely authoritarian?
Yeah.
There goes our liberal society, because they're not just going to adopt our culture.
Right.
And so, like, one of the things they wanted to do was you had to be in America for 8 years before you were eligible to become a citizen. You had to be here long enough to adopt the culture and to understand the culture. Understand the liberal ideas, because it wasn't a well, the founding fathers may have mostly been of English descent. There were a lot of people who were Irish, who were from my mind is blanking on where the Dutch are from.
Holland,
thank you. But they were Dutch, there were English, there were Spanish, there was many different types of European with many different cultures. And so they knew that they were not a homogenous nation, and that it would have to be the ideals and the principles that the values that would bind us together, and that would create a culture, and it would create traditions eventually. But when they were bringing it together, it certainly didn't.
Yeah. I think I read something about that too, about having to be in America for a certain amount of time before you become a citizen. I can't remember where it would have been. Maybe it was the Federalist Papers? But yeah, I definitely remember something about assimilation, where there needed to be adequate time to adopt the culture. Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I read that, because I really liked that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I understand it, and I think I would agree with the second principle here as well. Just, it makes a lot of sense to me and it makes sense why conservatives are against too much change.
Right.
Because too much change becomes destabilizing. And so the question is, what is too much change? What does that mean? And that's a subjective thing.
Yeah.
Okay, third, conservatives believe in what may be called the principle of prescription. Right, so this is kind of what we were talking a little bit. Conservatives sense that modern people are dwarfs on the shoulders of giants, able to see farther than their ancestors only because of the great stature of those who have preceded us in time. Therefore, conservatives very often emphasize the importance of prescription, that is, of things established by immemorial usage, so that the mind of man runneth not to the contrary. I feel like he's probably quoting different documents here. There exist rights of which the chief sanction is their antiquity, including rights to property often. These rights have existed for so long, for a good reason. Our morals are prescriptive in great part. Conservatives argue that we are unlikely, we moderns, to make any brave new discoveries in morals or politics or taste. Like, humans are not any different than they were, 1,000 years ago. Small things may change, but
any brave new discoveries in morals.
morals. I know.
That's really funny, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So it's perilous to weigh every passing issue on the basis of private judgment and private rationality.
Yeah.
The individual is foolish, but the species is wise, Burke declared.
I like how they used the word sense in their definition.
Yes.
Sense.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So this is somewhat what you were talking about with in a family culture, what you were talking about with your parents and your grandparents building a better life for you and understanding that is a privilege. Do you get the sense that when leftists talk about this issue, they talk about that like it's a sin?
Yeah.
And I've been trying to and I understand the point that, especially like Black Americans, descendants of slaves, you don't have the ancestral inheritance that we do. And it's basic, and so that might put you at a disadvantage. I don't think it puts everyone at a disadvantage. It's the hard part. That there are many, many disadvantaged people who live better lives than we do, Okay, but they talk about it like it's this weird jealousy thing that's a characteristic of Marxism. It seems like that while they talk about it like it's a sin, they demand to have it.
Yes. Well, yeah, because I think that their issue with that is, let's see, they find fault with the fact that you're not sharing it.
Well, they call it unearned privilege. So they don't view it. So I think this is what I'm trying to get at. Conservatives see it so completely differently. Our ancestors earned it for us, and they intended it for us.
Yes.
And so
that's called a gift.
I know, and so the perspective is completely different. Because I think they really do believe, oh, you were just given all this stuff. You were given inheritance, whatever that may mean. It's cultural inheritance, it's moral inheritance, it's money, it's land, it's whatever.
Yeah, an inheritance doesn't just appear. It's sacrificed for.
But I think the argument is that, oh, your ancestors earned it off the backs of the slaves. Our ancestors. And so it is a sin.
So
despite the fact that most Americans are not descended from slave owners.
Yeah.
I think that's statistically true. Pretty dang sure that's statistically true.
Even if you were, I think it's too late for that. Like, I think that we are far beyond the reach of slavery's effects. I haven't studied this. This is just my personal belief. But I think we're far beyond it because every single generation has the ability to turn their lives around completely. Like, you see millionaires and billionaires who are self-made, and I don't think they did it on the backs of slaves. Maybe they did. Maybe we're not supposed to have that much money. but there are also just a lot of ordinary people who turned their lives around, and they did it honestly, and it comes from hard work. So I don't think that, like, yeah.
Oh, I found. Sorry, this is just one thread, so I don't know how accurate this statistic is, but it's figured out by the Census Bureau that roughly 5% of whites have some ancestry that tracks back to slave owners.
Okay.
So that is 1 out of every 20 people.
5?
So every 20 whites that you meet, only one
Okay.
of them is descended from a slave owner.
Sure. Even that, though, like, I think if you traced everyone's financial stability over the last couple hundred years, you would see that it has shifted, because not only can a generation make a living or amass wealth for themselves, but a generation can also squander it very easily. So it's like, we don't know where that money is. We actually don't know.
Yep.
We don't know where it went. And, like, not even getting into the fact that if you're gonna trace every injustice that has ever occurred, we're gonna be going way back.
Forever.
We're gonna go back, to the Romans. You conquered the known world. We demand reparations. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm drawing out of this, conservatives really, really value inheritance. And
Oh, yeah.
that's definitely true for me. And so pointing at the value of it, like, we don't think that, or I'll speak for myself.
Mhm.
I don't think that the privilege that I've gotten because of my inheritances, and it's not money I'm talking about, it's morality, it's any of it,
whatever
where it
has been
come from,
passed to you.
right? It didn't just pass to me by accident, because I come from, and it's so hard to talk historically about this, because when I say, oh, like, my parents and my grandparents and my great grandparents were conservative, what was a conservative in the early 1900s?
Yeah.
What were they conserving? Because it's not what it's maybe partially what we're conserving today, which is the liberal American values, but it's not necessarily the same. They probably weren't talking about gun control, or pro-life. Those were not issues, and so it's hard to say, oh yeah, they were conservatives. But anyway, it was not by accident, because we actually value inheritance. It's very, very purposeful. Right. I am building something to give to the future generation. That is part of being a conservative.
Yeah, and I guess, I don't know, the cultures that exist within America right now, if they're missing that, like if they're not getting inheritances and they see someone else getting theirs and they're like, well, why didn't I get that? That can also be traced back to cultural practices. Yeah, I mean, and that's something you have control over. Like, maybe you didn't get an inheritance, but then you can create one for your children.
Right. All right. 4th, conservatives are guided by their principle of prudence. What is prudence? Prudence.
Prudence is like reasonableness.
Interesting. I've always just connected that to the word prude, which is not a kind word. Yeah. Any public measure ought to be judged by its probable long-run consequences, not merely by temporary advantage or popularity. So it's long-term thinking. Liberals and radicals, the conservatives say, are imprudent, for they dash at their objectives without giving much heed to the risk of new abuse New abuses worse than the evils they hope to sweep away. The law of unintended consequences. Providence moves slowly, but the devil always hurries. Ooh. Human society being complex, remedies cannot be simple if they are to be I don't know how to pronounce that word.
Efficacious.
Efficacious.
That's my guess.
Yeah. To have effect. The conservative declares that he is acts only after sufficient reflection, having weighed the consequences. So we tend to be slow moving, cautious creatures. Again, resistant to change. But it's not just the value of resistant to change. I think that's the misnomer of conservatism. It's like, it's not just that we don't like change because change. There's actual principles here and consequences with change that we are cautious about.
Right.
Which can be bad.
Yes. It can be detrimental.
It can be detrimental if you cannot change, if you cannot move fast enough to adapt to what is happening. But it's supposed to work in to counteract the impulsive types. The impulsivity of liberals. These people are in trouble. Help them now. With what money? Where's that coming from? Money? And it won't come from there forever. So if you want to help these people long term, don't just... It's a whole nother subject. The misbeliefs about money. Okay, I'm just going to put it that way.
Yeah, that would be a really fun topic. Well, so you were saying you're not sure what conservatives even were in the 1900s, but it's probably always been that there are people who lead the charge towards change. Maybe it's good change, but then there always has to be people who come around and ask them questions and caution them against this or that. I think there's always been people like that, but then they probably didn't. There was no need to split those people into two different groups. It was just two different parts of the same group. Because what you're describing also occurs in families and friendships. You have the friend who wants to go jump off a rock face into the lake, and you have the friend going, have you checked if there's any rocks down there? So yeah, it's just a natural... People naturally have those tendencies. I'm naturally a conservative in real life, not having to do with politics. Just
same. Yeah. More cautious.
Cautious, and I'm better at altering something that's given to me than coming up with something brand new.
Not so true of me. Yeah, as we go through the thing, I'm I think my personality is actually kind of liberal.
That's funny.
And I also think, I just don't know enough about the political landscape of the 1900s, but I do know more about the 1860s because Civil War. And so this is actually curious because if you look at the political landscape of the Civil War, the Republicans, and maybe this is the great switch that everyone refers to, the Democrats were the conservatives.
Right.
The Republicans were the not conservatives. I don't know if I'd call it, liberal, because they were fighting against slavery. And I know there's other motives and things that get mixed into there. See, because I think that personality-wise, liberal personality, conservative personality exists within both parties.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's liberal people who run by conservative principle when it comes to politics, but not necessarily to their life. And not that they're being contradictory. It's just that they might not be completely prudent in their life. They might be quite impulsive as a person, but that doesn't mean they agree with impulsive liberal politics.
Right.
It's this mishmash.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And yeah, that is... I've wanted to know more about that switch because Abraham Lincoln is also said to have invented the Republican Party. So I don't know what was going on.
I've heard, I don't know how true this is, that the Republican Party was created mostly around abolitionists.
Okay.
I've heard that. I don't know how true that is.
Mm-hmm.
That they didn't find, because previously to that, the parties were more, if I understand this correctly, federal versus something else. I don't know what but they were about federal government having more power versus the states having more power. Confederate,
I think.
And so in that way, if you think, oh, the Federalists are the conservatives and the Confederates are the liberals, that gets really confusing in the Civil War. And just these names mean absolutely nothing at some point because they've meant so many different things throughout history.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping... I think they would probably be called Confederates because we started out with the Articles of Confederation, which gave like all the power to the states, and there was almost no government, and so there were certain things they were trying to accomplish and it wasn't going very well, so they're like, okay, there needs to be a federal government, and so then that's why they wrote the Federalist Papers. And yeah,
let me look it up. Parties were very fluid in the period after the Revolution, but most adopted the label Federalists, while the opposition became known as Democratic Republicans.
Huh.
And today we have the Democrats and the Republicans.
Yeah.
Awesome sauce. But I could see, like, they wanted more of a democracy. They didn't want the federal government coming in and making laws for the entirety, for all the states.
Sure. Yeah. That's funny.
Well, and so this was actually, the abolitionists were frustrated with the federal party because what they wanted was kind of the same thing that you see with Roe v. Wade. They wanted the federal government to outlaw slavery for the entirety of the states.
Mm-hmm.
But because the conflict then was federal government versus state independence or state
authority.
Authority. There's a word I'm thinking of.
No, that's not the word. Yeah. What is it?
I know which word I'm thinking of, and I can't think
of it. I'm thinking of it too.
Not agency.
Sovereignty.
That's the word. I know it has something to do with kings. But the state sovereignty, and so they're like, the federal government was like, well, we can't do that. We can't just outlaw everything in the states.
Yeah.
Or this one thing in all the states. And that's why the Confederates did what they did, because they were like, you can't do that. You can't start telling us what to do. And so.
Well, that's interesting.
Anyway, well, going down the history rabbit trails tonight. Okay. Yeah. Fifth, the conservatives pay attention to the principle of variety. They feel affection for the proliferating intricacy of long-established social institution and modes of life. Not entirely sure what that means, as distinguished from the narrowing uniformity and deadening egalitarianism of radical systems. The heck? This is so outside of today's rhetoric that for the preservation of a healthy diversity in any civilization, there must survive order and classes, differences in material condition, and many sorts of inequality.
That helps to clarify.
They don't want everyone to be the same, and so that can be good and it can be bad. Again, the only true forms of equality are equality in the last judgment and equality before a just court of law. All of their attempts at leveling must lead at best to social stagnation.
Right.
Society requires honest and able leadership, and if natural and institutional differences are destroyed, presently some tyrant or host of squalid oligarchs will create new forms of inequality. Ooh, what does that sound like? Okay.
That's funny. I like the social stagnation part. I just kind of pictured it in a new way where if everyone's equal, there's nothing to work towards anymore. But if you have classes, if you've got like this guy who's homeless and he's poor and he's just like so sad, but then maybe like a rich guy helps him get a job or whatever, it's like you it's an achievement. It's a great achievement. And it's like no matter where life drops you, if everyone's allowed to just kind of do what they can do, there's always going to be someone who can help. And then you're never stagnant. Everyone's always moving towards something new.
Yeah, this one is confusing from me. I can see what you're saying, but I also see how it, like, I have a very American reaction to the idea of classes and a class system, and but if you think of it not as oppressive classes like the caste system in India or something like that, and you think of it as we have today, the lower class, the middle class, upper class, it's you could almost because this is specifically not American. This is just conservative, and so again, American is conservative, conserving of liberal values, and so American interpretation of this is kind of what I would say, and I do believe this, that a characteristic of a free society is inequity.
Right. Yeah.
If there is no inequity, if everyone is the same, it's not a free society.
Yeah. Yeah, because it has to be manipulated.
Yeah.
Oops.
So this isn't talking about freedom, about liberty or individual choices or anything like that. It's just saying that healthy diversity, everyone shouldn't look the same. Everyone shouldn't be in the same class. Everyone shouldn't. And in America, you see that more in the everyone shouldn't think the same. Everyone shouldn't sound the same. Everyone shouldn't look the same. Everyone shouldn't live the same life, pursue the same paths. Well, that's interesting to think about with the education system. Sorry, tangent.
Yeah.
Forming in my head.
Yeah, and well, so another. I think my dog might bark again. But, another. Oh yeah, she's been rescued. Well, so not only is inequality and inequity the result of who you were born to, it's also the result of what you do. And so it's like, you're right. A free society produces, or the natural consequence of a free society is inequality because everyone chooses to do different things, as well as, like there are factors. Birth is a factor, skill is a factor, like everyone's born with different talents and stuff like that. But then
self-belief is a factor, morality is a factor,
yeah,
mental health is a factor.
yeah.
which is a consequence of your upbringing most of the time.
Yeah.
Which is the choices of the people who brought you up, or the people that you encountered as a young person.
Yeah. But then you can also choose to like go get help if you need to, or yeah, it's the diversity is, it's kind of like if you're picturing a garden, if you cut everything down and pull everything out and just plant like grass, everything looks the same and there's no variety, and it's actually a very weak plant life because it's only one type. And so if a virus sweeps through, or a disease sweeps through, it can kill them off because there's no diversity. But if you have a wild garden and you just let things grow like they want to grow and let each seed do what it wants to do, then you get something that's beautiful to look at, and each plant benefits from each other because one's tall and it produces shade for the short ones, and the short ones help keep the water in the soil to feed the tall ones. And it's like, you just That's freedom. That's what freedom looks like in a society where everyone has a different role to play. That's the garden analogy.
I see here the beginnings of the nuance and intricacies of conservatism, because it's not just impose order.
Right.
Stop trying to create chaos, guys, because this is not about imposing order. Right. It's more the belief that you need just enough order to promote, kind of like what you're saying, there is an order to ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
It's
a natural order.
A natural order, and it's not. It is a diverse order.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is kind of saying, if your order gets too authoritarian, and you lose the diversity, that's not good.
Yeah, it weakens everyone involved, and it stunts their potential, and it requires more of them than they're capable of.
And there's just oppression and suppression, and
yeah,
which leads to a lot of very bad things.
Yep.
All right, 6. Conservatives are chastened by their principle of imperfectibility. We've talked a little bit about this before, that a conservative is definitely anti-utopian.
Right.
We don't actually believe that you can reach perfection, or that people can be perfect, or a system can be perfect, or an order can be perfect, because humans aren't perfect. And so anything, there is no such thing as utopia.
Yeah, common sense says nobody's perfect. And common sense looks at oneself and goes, yeah, I'm not great. I mean, I think I'm good, but I'm not great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like this just nebulous endpoint that is at the heart of progressivism and Marxism. Any utopian based. Collectivism is also utopian based. It's just a step, because they're this change and forward movement type of idea. And so your ideology, or not ideology is the wrong word, your philosophy can't be one of change and then come at an arrival point. Like, then you lose your philosophy.
That's so true. Yeah. My camera battery is about to die, so I'm gonna change it real fast. I probably won't actually disappear too bad. Carry on.
Alrighty. Let's see. 6. Conservatives are... No, I already did that one. 7th. Conservatives are persuaded that freedom and property are closely linked. Right. This is probably the biggest reason why we are not socialists and not collectivists. Because this is actually part of how we view the world. Yes. It's not just because we don't want to share everything. We have... Right. This is part of the worldview that it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. That you cannot share everything and have liberty.
Right.
You can out of liberty, you can decide you personally would like to share everything. But the enforced sharing of everything is not liberty.
Right. Especially when it comes to like your home or something like that. Like everyone, you need to have a house that is your own, where you know that someone's not going to walk in, or you know that someone's not going to show up, or, like you need to know that you can count on it so that you can exercise your freedom or build something, or, I don't know, get some exercise,
I was thinking too how this ties back to what we were saying about public or common.
Mm-hmm.
how many rules exist about what you can and cannot do in public spaces.
Yeah.
Right? You can't litter.
Right.
You can't set off fireworks. You can't, it's like you do not have liberty in public spaces. And it also just the idea that liberty includes expressing yourself, whatever that may be, how you speak, but how you dress, the art that you do, the stories that you tell, blah, 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 blah. It is impossible to fully express yourself without infringing on everyone else. And
Yeah.
so this part of liberty is to have a space that is yours and no one else's, that you are free to express yourself in. And we see that in how people decorate their houses and how they arrange their house. It's like your house is where you do what you want to do, and it doesn't infringe on anyone else, because out there in the public space, you do what you want to do, and it infringes on everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
There's some interesting things in here. The more widespread is the possession of private property, the more stable and productive is a commonwealth.
Mm-hmm.
Economic leveling, conservatives maintain, is not economic progress.
Right. Yeah, it causes stagnation because no one wants to invent, because they don't get to keep anything that they might earn from that invention, or they don't get to enjoy the fruits of that invention because everyone else has to have their turn doing it, and it all has to be equal, and it's silly. Clip that.
Lilly, 2023.
Yeah. Oh no,
not the light!
thing!
No!
Not the light! Using up all my battery? Dang light. Well, this is interesting. Let's see what we can do about this. Go ahead and keep reading.
Okay. Number 8.
In the dark.
Conservatives uphold voluntary community, quite as they oppose involuntary collectivism. Yes.
Yes. That's a fact.
So I think this is maybe one of the misconceptions about conservatives when we say we don't want collectivism. People turn that into, oh, you don't want to share, you just want your stuff for yourself.
Right.
But this is interesting to say. Although Americans have been attached strongly to privacy and private rights, they also have been a people conspicuous for a successful spirit of community.
Mm-hmm.
In a genuine community, the decisions most directly affecting the lives of citizens are made locally and voluntarily. And so I think this is some of what I would call I've been having lots of different thoughts on this, so it's kind of jumbled because I haven't come to many conclusions yet. But I would say that the value of that community can be a value.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the American traditions that conservatives conserve is the value of community. And so even though we're anti-collectivism, we're pro-community.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to be free, and freedom means you have the choice to say no.
Right.
But because we believe that values are passed down through culture, or at least through most best effectively through parenting and through family, then you should train your children to value community, basically, is how it comes. You should teach them why it is beneficial to everyone to value community.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll never be forced to. It's the same with generosity. I was thinking about this, and the common sense solution, with all of the rich must pay their fair share and all that sort of stuff. When you step back from all the politics and all of that, the common sense solution to poverty is to aggregate wealth in the hands of generous people.
Yeah.
That's the solution.
Yeah.
And so there's 2 pieces to that. You have to figure out how to create wealth and get it into someone specific, a specific person's hands. But you must also instill the value of generosity in people. And that's where things just go wrong, because I agree, there are a lot of very rich people who do dumb things and ungenerous things with their money. But it's still, conservative thought says that is one piece of, how would I say it? That is where the sin of liberalism is the lesser evil. If you were to inflict order on that and force people to be generous, it wouldn't be freedom. And so it is better that all people have freedom than no people be poor.
Yeah.
In weighing the ills and the evils, what is the lesser of two evils? And conservatism said it is better for some people to be poor than for no one to be free.
Right. And another side of that, the side I'm seeing, is like it's better for generosity to be genuine than it is for it to be fake.
Well, how I grew up, if it was forced, it wasn't generosity.
Yeah.
My mom never made us share.
Oh, yeah.
You know? But she talked to us about being generous. We were allowed to say no. And again, it was tied to private property. We had some, like, family toys, but a lot of us they were our toys, you know? And so we were allowed to say yes or no. But mom would talk to us about being generous and be generous to us, model generosity. And so that's what she often says, is like, if you're forcing your kids to share with one another, you're not teaching them to be generous. If you're forcing, it's not generosity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I guess the people who are on the receiving end and the people who are affected by, so say it's, say your town is filled with like a bunch of homeless people, and there's also a resident millionaire, and you like enact a law that forces him to donate a bunch of money to the homeless people. On the outside, it looks like the problem has been solved because now the homeless people have what they wanted. They're not maybe bothering anyone anymore. Yes.
This is again part of the money problem and the misconception that money means wealth. Because you haven't created wealth for the homeless people.
Oh yeah, because as soon as they spend that money, it's gone.
Yeah, and now no one has money.
Yeah, they don't know. They don't understand. Maybe in some cases, they don't even understand what got them into poverty in the first place. And so, how can you know how to avoid that in the future?
One of those prudence things.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not. You're right. It's not real generosity, but I think that some might view it as though the goal of generosity has been accomplished by forcing the giving. But yeah, no, it just creates more problems.
So, do you feel like you grew up being taught to uphold community? I feel like I need to look at the word community.
Voluntarily uphold community.
Oh, sorry. Technically it says uphold voluntary community.
Okay, yeah. Yes and no. I mean, I grew up in a family of introverts, and so a lot of times when there were voluntary community opportunities, we're like, maybe not. But no, I guess my grandma's more that way, where she knows how important it is to like meet your neighbors and stuff like that. So I would do that with her, or we would go to the store and she would know the owner of the store, and they'd talk about things, and um yeah, that's always beneficial to know the owner of a store, because it's like if you need help, they'll talk to you. um yeah, so I guess
Hmm.
yes and no. The principle definitely existed, but we didn't necessarily play it out maybe as much as we should have.
I think it also depends on your definition of community.
Yeah.
Like, I think about my parents grew up very involved in their church community.
Mm-hmm.
That's still true. Um, that's always been the case. But we weren't involved in like the local community, the stores and the schools and the parks, or or politics. Like, we weren't involved in any of that. And part of it is where we lived. I don't think we went to any stores that the owner was there. We went to Walmart and like.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a benefit of her having been raised in that area too, because it's like maybe her parents knew their parents, and so there's kind of a long established connection that is a little bit easier to maintain. Yeah. And then it would also be natural to maintain that one rather than go and create new ones.
Right. I wonder if it's just a modernity thing. Our culture has progressively lost community for half a century now. Because I think that's true. I would say that's true of my grandparents as well. They were deeply embedded in communities, um, in lots of different communities, like their physical local community, in their church community, in their family community.
Yeah.
So I would. That's been interesting. But I don't think I'm nearly as connected into the community, well, as that. It's like my grandma would still spend hours long phone calls on old friends that she had, from 30, 40 years ago. And it's like, I don't talk to my friends from 10 years ago if I'm not still friends with them, if they're not still actually in my life.
Yeah. That's funny.
But yeah, it's part of it is social media, though, because I feel like I can stay connected because I still see their pictures or whatever.
That's true.
I don't have to sit there and wonder what happened to that person. I know, because
yeah,
we're all on social media.
The other day.
All right. So I would say this is a failing value currently in all of America.
The rise, though.
Yeah, I think people are feeling the lack of it, and so it's coming back into fashion.
Yeah.
And I think that if you consider family community, that we are both very connected in with that community. I think because we didn't go to school, you don't have a huge community outside of that.
Yeah. Some people do. But yeah.
Some homeschoolers. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my community growing up actually was my family, because I live next door to my grandparents and pretty close to a lot of other families. So it's like we wouldn't necessarily see everyone every day, but we would see everyone pretty often. And so those were the main relationships that we maintained. And then we also had friend groups, and we also had church and stuff like that, but none of them were as prioritized.
Community to me means one of the underlying things for community is giving and receiving. And so I think that you can be friendly with people and be part of a friend group without actually being in community with them, because you're just kind of hanging out. You're not actually doing things for them and having them do things for you. And some friend groups are like that. Some friend groups are your community.
Mm.
But just because you're friends doesn't also mean your community.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, so the brand new recording software that I've never used before is being a little bit weird, and we don't know exactly where it cut off, but we know that it's probably time to wrap things up because it might be weird again pretty soon. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion and our thoughts, and we hope that you have picked up a dictionary and used your brain today, and that's always a good thing to do. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.